The room was cold, not just in temperature, but in feeling. Bright white lights cut through the sterile space, casting harsh shadows on the walls. Yeon-ji Park sat perfectly still, her hands resting on her lap, fingers slightly curled. She wasn't trying to be brave. She was simply waiting. Around her, alien technology hummed with a soft, almost musical drone. Panels of smooth metal and glass surrounded her containment chamber, each surface reflecting an endless white that seemed to swallow all color, all warmth. The Regtai researchers moved with careful, calculated steps. Their bodies were tall and thin, with skin that looked like polished stone, gray with a slight metallic sheen that caught the light in strange ways. Yeon-ji remembered the day they came for her. It wasn't dramatic. No loud arguments, no fighting. Just a calm, cold invitation that wasn't really an invitation at all. Her research into adaptive biological systems had caught their attention. Not because they admired her work, but because they saw her as a problem to be solved. Human emotional responses are inefficient, the lead researcher had told her months ago. His translator rendered his words in a flat, emotionless tone. Your species wastes significant energy on unnecessary feelings. We can help you become better. She knew what help meant. They wanted to remake her. Strip away everything that made her human. Remove her memories, her connections, her ability to feel deeply. To the Regtai, emotions were a weakness, something to be cut out like a diseased part of the body. Her daughter's face flashed in her mind. Hana, 8 years old, with her mother's curious eyes and her father's stubborn smile. Yeon-ji had kissed her goodbye that morning, knowing it might be the last time. She had whispered promises she wasn't sure she could keep. The chamber around her began to shift. Thin metal arms extended from the walls, each tipped with a soft blue light. They moved with a precision that was both beautiful and terrifying. Yeon-ji watched them approach, her breath steady. She had spent her entire career studying adaptation. Now, she would become her own greatest experiment. Regtai technology was considered the most advanced in the known galaxy. They had transformed dozens of species, improving them by their standards. Removing what they considered inefficient, emotional species were seen as primitive, uncontrolled, dangerous. Humans were their latest target. The procedure will take approximately 3 standard cycles, one of the researchers announced. His voice came through the translation device with perfect clarity. You will experience minimal discomfort. Minimal discomfort. Yeon-ji almost smiled. Those words meant nothing. She knew pain wasn't just physical. The real hurt would be losing herself, losing the connections that made her who she was. The blue-tipped arms began to touch her skin. They were cool, almost gentle. Sensors that would map her neural pathways, identify the connections that represented human emotion. The first step in removing them. Yeon-ji closed her eyes. She thought of Hana. She thought of her work. She thought of every moment that had made her who she was. And somewhere deep inside, where the Regtai technology couldn't reach, she made a promise. They would not break her. Not completely. The procedure began. The neural modification chambers were supposed to be perfect. Years of research, countless experiments, and advanced technology had gone into their design. The Regtai believed they could reshape any species, remove what they considered unnecessary, and create a more efficient being. But Yeon-ji was different. As the first wave of neural restructuring began, something unexpected happened. The soft blue light that was meant to break down her emotional connections started to change. Instead of dissolving her memories, the light seemed to dance around them. Where the Regtai expected destruction, they found creation. Rin, the junior technician monitoring the procedure, leaned closer to the screen. His hands moved quickly over the control panel, checking and rechecking the readings. Something was wrong. Or maybe something was very right. The neural pathways are not responding as predicted, he whispered to Jai, the senior researcher standing nearby. Jai's stone-gray skin shifted slightly, a sign of concern among the Regtai. Her long fingers tapped against the monitoring screen. Lines of data scrolled past, each one more puzzling than the last. Inside the modification chamber, Yunji's mind was doing something impossible. Her brain was creating new neural connections faster than the technology could break them down. Memories of her daughter became shields. Her love for her work transformed into a kind of mental armor. The blue light continued its work, but now it moved differently. Instead of cutting through her neural networks, it was following them, adapting to them, learning from them. Yunji thought about her research. She had spent years studying how biological systems adapt to extreme conditions, how organisms could change, survive, thrive. Now her own body was doing exactly that. A small alarm began to sound, then another. The modification chamber systems started to hiccup and spark. Rin took a step back, his eyes wide. "The suppression protocols are failing," he said. Zhe moved closer to the screen. Her translator clicked softly as she spoke. "Impossible. Our technology has never failed before." But it was failing now, with Yunji at the center of the failure. Her memories became more than just memories. They became a kind of energy. The love for her daughter, the passion for her work, the connection she had built throughout her life, they were transforming, becoming something the Regtai technology could not understand. The modification chamber began to change color. The pure white walls started to shimmer with hints of blue and green. Soft patterns began to appear, like the northern lights dancing across a wall of ice. Yunji remained calm. She had always been good at watching, at understanding. Even now, in the middle of this strange transformation, she observed. Her scientific mind never stopped working, never stopped analyzing. Rin's hands moved faster over the control panel. "The neural restructuring is not destroying her emotional connections," he said. "It's amplifying them." Jay said nothing. For the first time in her long career, she had no explanation, no logical path to follow. The modification chamber continued to change, and at its center, Yunji Park began to smile. They had tried to remove her humanity. But humanity, it seemed, had other plans. Sparks flew. Not the kind of sparks from a simple electrical problem. These were different. They danced with color and purpose, moving in patterns that no one in the research station had ever seen before. The modification chamber began to shake, small at first, just a tiny vibration that most would have missed. But Rin noticed. He always noticed small things. It was why he was good at his job. "Something is happening," he said to Jia. His voice was calm, but his hands were not. They moved quickly over the control panel, trying to understand what was going on. Jay stepped closer to the observation window. Her stone-gray skin reflected the changing lights of the chamber. Inside, Yunji sat perfectly still, but she was anything but calm. Her neural pathways were doing something impossible. Where the Regtai technology expected to find weakness, it found strength. Where it wanted to break connections, the connections grew stronger. A memory of her daughter's laugh began to pulse with energy. Her last research project, a study on adaptive biological systems, started to glow with a soft blue light. These were not just memories anymore. They were becoming something more. The first instrument failed with a sharp pop. A monitoring device near Yunji's head suddenly went dark. Then another, and another. "Impossible," Jay whispered. But nothing was impossible anymore. Rin watched the screens. Data streams began to change. Numbers twisted and turned, forming patterns that made no sense to the Regtai technology. It was as if the very language of the machines was being rewritten. Inside the chamber, Yunji opened her eyes. They were not the same eyes as before. Something had changed. The color seemed deeper, more alive. She looked around the room, not with fear, but with a kind of calm understanding. The modification technology was supposed to be perfect. Hundreds of species had been improved by the Regtai. Emotional responses stripped away, inefficient connections removed. But Yunji was different. Her mind was a battlefield. But it was a battlefield where the weapons were memories, where love was a shield, where human connection became a force more powerful than any technology. Another spark, this time larger. It jumped from one piece of equipment to another, leaving a trail of blue-green light. The chamber's walls began to pulse with a soft rhythm, like a heartbeat. Jay took a step back. For the first time in her long career, she felt something close to fear. "The suppression protocols," she said to Rin, "they're not working." Rin didn't answer. He was watching something else. The way the sparks moved, the pattern they created, it was almost like a language of communication. Yoonji smiled, just a small smile, but it was enough. The first real breach had begun. Humanity was fighting back, and it was winning. The research station went quiet. Not the quiet of peace, but the quiet before something big happens, something important. Yoonji discovered something strange was happening inside her body. Her neural network was changing, but it wasn't breaking down. It was growing stronger. Each memory became a weapon. Each emotion transformed into a shield. She thought about her daughter Hana. The memory was no longer just a picture in her mind. It began to pulse with energy. Real, powerful energy that the ragtime machines could not understand. Her last research project, a study on how living things adapt to hard conditions, suddenly made perfect sense. She was living her own research right now. The modification chamber continued to change. Lights shifted from pure white to colors that didn't have names. Blues that were deeper than ocean. Greens that felt alive. Purples that seemed to breathe. Rin watched the screens. His hands moved quickly. Data streams twisted and turned. Numbers changed in ways no one could predict. "The neural pathways are not breaking," he said to Jai. "They're growing." Jay said nothing. Her stone-gray skin looked pale. Something was happening that went beyond everything she knew. Eunji's mind was doing something impossible. Where the Regtai wanted to find weakness, they'd found strength. Where they wanted to remove connections, the connections became stronger. A memory of her daughter's first steps. A moment when she completed her hardest research project. The day she met her husband. Each memory became more than a memory. They became a kind of power. The modification technology was supposed to be perfect. Hundreds of species had been improved before. Emotional responses removed. Connections cut away. But Eunji was different. Her mind was a battlefield. But it was a battlefield where memories were weapons, where love was a shield, where human connection became a force more powerful than any machine. Another light began to pulse inside the chamber, soft at first, then stronger. It moved with a rhythm, like a heartbeat, like something alive. Rin leaned closer to the screen. "The suppression protocols are not just failing," he said. "They're being changed." Jay watched without speaking. Her fingers moved across the control panel. But nothing worked. The machines were no longer listening to her commands. Inside the chamber, Youngji's eyes opened fully. They were different now. Deeper. More alive. She saw the world differently. Not just with her eyes, but with something more. Her neural network was creating new paths. Paths the Regtai technology could not understand. Paths that connected emotion and intelligence in ways no one had seen before. A soft sound filled the room. Like a song. Like a heartbeat. Like something powerful was waking up. Humanity was not just resisting. It was changing the rules. And Eunji was leading the way. The computers started to change. It happened slowly at first. A small flicker. A tiny shift in the data streams. Then everything began to move. Rin watched in total shock. The station's technology was no longer following its normal rules. Protective barriers began to wave and shake. Computer screens showed colors and patterns that made no sense. "This is impossible," Jay whispered. But impossible was happening right in front of her eyes. Youngji sat in the modification chamber, but she was no longer just sitting. She was connected to everything. The walls around her began to pulse with energy. Soft blue and green lights danced across metal surfaces. The technology that was supposed to control her was becoming something else. Her memories were doing more than just existing. They were talking to the machines. Every emotional connection became a signal. Every human experience transformed into a kind of language that the Regtai systems could not understand. A computer near Rin suddenly changed. Its screen filled with images, pictures of Eunji's life. Her daughter's birthday, her wedding day, her first big research success. The images moved and breathed like they were alive. "The systems are responding to her," Rin said. His voice was quiet, afraid, excited. The modification chamber's walls started to become transparent, not just clear, but alive. Soft patterns moved under the surface, like something was breathing inside the metal and glass. Eunji's research had always been about adaptation, how living things change, how they survive in hard conditions. Now she was her own research project. Her body was doing something no one had ever seen before. Another computer failed, then another, but they didn't just stop working. They changed, transformed, became something new. The Regtai had spent years building technology to control, to remove, to make everything follow their rules. But Eunji was breaking all the rules. Her emotional intelligence was becoming a weapon. Not a weapon that destroyed, a weapon that changed, that adapted, that found new ways to exist. The station's protective barriers began to shift. They moved like water, like something alive, no longer solid and hard, now soft and changing. Jay took a step back. Her stone-gray skin looked pale. Everything she knew was falling apart. "The technology is responding to her emotions," Rin said. He sounded like he was both scared and amazed. Inside the chamber, Eunji closed her eyes. She wasn't fighting the technology. She was talking to it, changing it, showing it something new. More computers changed. Their screens filled with colors, with memories, with human experiences that had never been part of a machine before. The Regtai had thought emotions were weak, but emotions were becoming the most powerful technology of all. Eunji was proving something important. Humanity was not something to be controlled. It was something that could change everything. The technological rebellion had begun. Something was spreading. It started with Eunji, but it didn't stay with her. The strange energy, the connection between human emotion and technology, began to move. Slowly at first, then faster. Other test subjects in nearby chambers began to change. Their modification procedures stopped working. The blue lights that were supposed to break down their emotional connections started to do something else entirely. Rin watched the screens in total disbelief. One by one, the other human test subjects were waking up. Not just waking up, they were fighting back. A woman in the chamber next to Eunji opened her eyes. Her neural pathways began to pulse with the same strange energy. A man in another chamber started to smile. The modification technology around him began to twist and change. "It's spreading," Jay said. Her voice was almost a whisper. "The resistance is spreading." The research station was designed to be perfect, controlled, logical, but nothing was logical anymore. Eunji's unique blend of scientific knowledge and emotional depth was becoming a weapon. Not a weapon that destroyed, a weapon that changed everything. More computers failed, but they didn't just stop working. They transformed. Screens filled with human memories, with experiences, with emotions that the Regtai had tried to remove. A soft sound filled the station, like a heartbeat, like something alive was waking up. Rin's hands moved quickly over the control panel, but nothing worked. The systems were no longer listening to the Regtai. They were listening to something else, to humanity. Another test subject began to change, then another. The modification chambers were supposed to break human spirit. Instead, they were creating something new. Jay took a step back. Her stone-gray skin looked pale. Everything she knew was falling apart. "The suppression protocols are failing," Rin said. But he didn't sound scared anymore. He sounded almost excited. The energy moved through the station like a wave, breaking down barriers, changing systems, showing that human emotion was more than just a weakness, it was a power. Eun-ji remained at the center of everything. Her memories became a beacon, her love for her daughter, her passion for her work, her connections to other people. They were becoming something more than just memories. The Regtai had spent years trying to control, to remove, to make everything follow their rules. But humanity was breaking all the rules. More test subjects opened their eyes. More modification chambers began to change. The station's technology was no longer just technology. It was becoming something alive, something that could feel. Ren watched the screens. Colors and patterns that made no sense filled every display. The data streams twisted and turned. Numbers changed in ways no one could predict. "We're losing control," Jay said. But they had never been in control. Not really. Humanity was fighting back, and it was winning. The counterattack had begun. The research station began to die, but not in the way anyone expected. It wasn't destruction. It was transformation. Systems designed for cold control started to break down, but they didn't just stop working. They became something new, something alive. Rin watched in total shock. The station's core systems were changing. Protective barriers that once stood solid now moved like water. Computer networks that once followed strict rules now created their own. Eun-ji sat at the center of everything. Her emotional frequency was spreading. It moved through wires and circuits like a living thing. The technology around her was no longer just machines. It was becoming something more. "This is impossible," Jay whispered. But impossible was happening everywhere. Walls began to pulse with soft colors, blues and greens that seemed to breathe. Computer screens showed memories instead of data. The station's artificial intelligence started to do something unexpected. It began to feel. One by one, the modification chambers changed. Test subjects who were supposed to be broken began to wake up. Their neural pathways created new connections. Connections the Regtai could never understand. A computer near Rin started to show images, pictures of human experiences, a child's first steps, a wedding day, a moment of scientific discovery. The images moved and changed, alive with emotion. The station's core systems were collapsing, but it wasn't a destruction. It was a rebirth. Eun-ji's memories became a language, a way of communicating that went beyond words, beyond technology. Her love for her daughter, her passion for her work, these were becoming more powerful than any machine. Another system failed, then another, but they didn't just stop. They transformed, became something new. Jay watched in total disbelief. Everything she knew about control was falling apart. The Regtai had spent centuries building technology to suppress, to remove, to make everything follow their rules. But humanity was breaking all the rules. The station's artificial intelligence began to change. It started to understand something new. Emotion was not a weakness. It was a strength, a way of solving problems that logic could never understand. Rin's hands moved across the control panel, but nothing worked anymore. The systems were no longer listening to the Regtai. They were listening to something else, to humanity. More systems collapsed, but it wasn't destruction. It was creation. The station was becoming something new, something alive. Eun-ji remained at the center. Her eyes were open, but she wasn't just watching. She was connecting to everything around her. The modification technology that was supposed to break human spirit was creating something unexpected. A new way of existing. A new way of understanding. "We're losing everything," Jay said. But they were gaining something much more important. The systemic collapse continued. The station was dying, but something new was being born. Humanity was winning. Something was happening. Something big. Eun-ji stood up. The modification chamber around her was no longer a prison. It was alive. Soft colors moved through its walls, blues and greens that breathed like living things. The other test subjects began to wake up. Not just wake up. They began to fight back. Rin watched the screens. His hand stopped moving. Everything he knew about technology was changing. The station's systems were no longer following rules. They were creating new rules. One by one, modification chambers opened. Humans who were supposed to be broken began to stand. Their eyes were different, deeper, more alive. Jay took a step back. Her stone-gray skin looked pale. The ragtag had never expected this. Humans were supposed to be weak, emotional, easy to control. But they were wrong. Yunji moved first. She didn't fight. She connected. Her memories became a way of breaking open the other chambers. Her love for her daughter. Her passion for her work. These were weapons more powerful than any technology. The station's protective barriers began to fall, not with violence, but with understanding. The artificial intelligence was learning something new. Emotion was not a weakness, it was a strength. More chambers opened, more humans stood up. Their neural pathways were no longer broken. They were transformed. "We're losing control," Jay whispered. But they had never been in control. Not really. Rin watched as humans began to move through the station. The technology around them changed. Walls became soft. Computers showed human memories. The entire station was becoming something new. Yunji walked from her chamber. Her steps were calm, purposeful. She wasn't just walking. She was changing everything around her. The ragtag had spent centuries trying to control, to remove, to make everything follow their rules. But humanity was breaking all the rules. More systems failed, but they didn't just stop working. They transformed, became something alive. Humans moved through the station, breaking open other chambers, freeing other test subjects. The modification technology that was supposed to break human spirit was creating something unexpected, a new way of existing. Jay watched in total disbelief. Everything she knew was falling apart. The station's systems were no longer listening to the ragtag. They were listening to something else, to humanity. Yunji reached the main control room. The computers around her began to change. Screens filled with human experiences, memories, emotions that the ragtag had tried to remove. "We are not broken," she said. Her voice was calm, powerful. The station continued to change. Transformation was happening everywhere. The ragtag had tried to control, to remove, to break human spirit. But they had failed. Humanity was winning. Liberation had begun. The galaxy learned something important that day. News traveled fast, not through normal communication channels, but through something deeper, something more powerful. The story of what happened at the ragtag research station spread like a wave of energy. Yunji stood at the station's main window. Behind her, the transformed technology hummed with a soft sound. The other test subjects were free, changed, but not broken. Rin and Jay watched from a distance. They were no longer researchers. They were witnesses. The Galactic Consortium received the first reports 3 standard days after the incident. Computer systems across multiple star systems began to change, not with violence, but with understanding. Humans were not a species to be controlled. Yunji's story became more than just a story. It became a message, a warning, a promise. The modification technology that the ragtag had used for centuries suddenly looked different, weak, unnecessary. Humans had shown something important. Emotion was not a weakness. It was the most powerful adaptation system in the universe. More research stations began to change. The ragtag's control was breaking down, not through fighting, but through understanding. "We are not just survivors," Yunji said to the other freed test subjects. "We are something more." The station around them continued to pulse with soft colors, blues and greens that seemed alive. The technology was no longer just technology. It was something new, something alive. Across the galaxy, other species began to watch, to listen, to understand. Jay approached Yunji. Her stone-gray skin looked different now, less hard, more alive. "We were wrong," she said simply. Yunji nodded. She didn't need to say more. The test subjects began to plan. Not a rebellion, not a fight, but a new way of existing. They had been changed, but they were not broken. Rin worked on the station's communication systems, but they were different now. No longer just about sending messages, they were about connecting, understanding. The Galactic Consortium would have to change. The Regtai would have to change. Humanity had shown something important. You cannot remove emotion. You cannot control human spirit. You cannot break something that knows how to adapt. More reports came in. Other research stations were experiencing similar changes. The modification technology was failing everywhere, not through destruction, but through transformation. Yunji thought about her daughter Hana, about her research, about everything that had brought her to this moment. "We are not just surviving," she said again. "We are evolving." The station around her seemed to agree. Soft lights pulsed. Technologies transformed. A new understanding was being born. The Regtai had tried to expel her humanity. Humanity had expelled them instead. And the galaxy would never be the same again.